This is an automatically generated Guild Wars 2 World v World roaming commentary. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to be going over some of the actions that I take as a Willbender while roaming in World vs. World to show how decision making and human skill expression can make a huge difference in the amount of fun you have and your performance. So we're getting a down here on this Dragon Hunter, and my teammate is getting pressured by their Scrapper, so I immediately port over to the Scrapper and start pressuring them because, yeah, I want to help them out. But I see that 3 more enemies start coming in, so I immediately say, okay, this is a lost fight. So I back out, and my ally actually stays in, so they're gonna die. But I see that their Scrapper is kind of low, and I have my burst combo. So the burst combo is like sword 5 into F1 into great sword 2, but I've got sword 4 as well, which can work. So if I can get the kill on their Scrapper, then I can potentially revive my ally. So I'm just going to go in for the burst. If it works out, then it works out and we get the stomp. If it doesn't, I leave immediately. So I go in for the sword 5. I actually do get the down, so I use my F3 to stomp, and my ally is potentially going to revive this. So what I've done is I've used the F3 so that I can get a stability stomp, and I'm going to take a lot of pressure while stomping, but this is the only way to solve the situation, so I'm going to do it. And while I am stomping, you'll see I use my condition cleanse, and I'm just trying to minimize the damage that I take so I can finish the stomp, but my ally actually rallies so we don't get the stomp, and now I'm in a lot of trouble, so I'm going to use my elite. And now what I just did here was I targeted the Warthog, which is like to the south of me right now. And I'm going to juke them using that Warthog because I'm going to use my sword 2 to port through the terrain here. And what I've done is I've created distance because they thought I was going one direction, and then I go the exact opposite direction with a huge movement skill. And the latency for the, the human mistake or the human error input is going to take them a while to catch up to me. So we're going to get some distance, but I get taunted, and now I get essentially no distance off of that play. So we have a lot of pressure on us. A dodge jump to get up that ledge because I'm taking a lot of pressure, so I have to dodge. But if I dodge without jumping, then it'll take me longer to get up that ledge. So really important to practice your jump dodging, not just for montages, but in some situations, the jump dodge is actually important. So we need to disengage entirely because this is a big no-no. I have no cooldowns. There's like 4 on me, so I've got nothing left I can do. And yeah, looks like I'm going to get out of combat. So this is pretty good because I got a full reset. But this is Maguma we're talking about. So they're going to chase me because they're extremely thirsty. That's just, average Maguma player. So they get me off my mount with the lance, and I've actually capped this camp earlier. So I can use this camp to help me out because we've got the frogs here. The frogs are extremely powerful in helping me here. So I use my sword 2 through the terrain again. So using the distance, creating the distance is kind of like the idea of this this commentary, because using ports you can often split your enemies just by using the terrain and then porting back, right? So we actually get the catalyst here down because we've isolated them, and now that they're down, Willbender is really good at cleaving down bodies because you have the Willbender flames, which are kind of like symbols. Then you have symbols themselves, so you have a lot of pulsing damage to just hit enemies that are not moving. So now there's it looks like an engineer and a vindicator trying to like size me up. So I want to bait them into my camp. I see that they're spawning the Spear of Archimora, so I back off. And I know that the Vindicator is probably the tankiest because I see that they have the Salvation trait line. So the real target is probably the Core Engie because they're going to be the easiest to kill. Salvation, Vindicator, they can just dodge. So in this situation, I have to play very aggressively while also having someone casting on me. And the thing is, the Vindicator can actually be kited. So what I want to do is I want to create distance between me and the Vindicator while also hitting the Engineer. So how do I do that? Well, I know that the Vindicator is melee. So what I can do is I can move away from the Engineer, and then I can port to the Engineer, and that'll essentially split them and create space to give me more time to kill the Engineer. So I'm just kiting. I have my F3 up here so I can actually trade, and my heal skill, which will heal me for damage dealt. So I can trade here, but as soon as it runs out, I back off, create space now. I go behind the logs here, which is going to create that space, but I also see that the Engineer has the AED heal on, and that's just going to heal them. So I wait a little bit to finish them off. It runs out, and they use their Elixir S, so they're pretty much out of cooldowns. I don't really have my port for a bit, so I use my elite skill to survive, and I see that they're running away with rocket boots, so I keep chasing, and they're running away from the Vindicator now, so they're creating the distance for me, so I can just chase the Engineer without worrying about the Vindicator too much, because just chasing the Engineer is already creating that distance. But when the Engineer fights near the Vindicator, I have some troubles here. So I landed my Greatsword 5, and I pulled them both in. So while they're CC'd, I can actually counter pressure. Usually when you're outnumbered, you cannot just freely use your abilities on someone because they're going to spam a lot of CC on you. So the only time you can really interact is when you have these specific cooldowns like blinds or CC, and it'll ascend, or like stability, which will prevent you from getting CC'd, so you can at least trade with them rather than getting permanently CC'd. And it looks like there's also an elementalist chasing me, like there's a catalyst coming back, so I just disengage entirely, go back to the camp, and I'm looking around to target anything in case I need to port to it. The catalyst is chasing me, and we're creating distance here again, because now the catalyst is on the other side of the little hut here, and I can port through. Now I'm on top of the Engineer. But see, the thing is, the situation is now a 1v3 instead of a 1v2. So before, when I needed to split the Vindicator from the Engineer, that was good enough. But now it's an even harder situation, so just 1v2ing is like a better situation for me. So it's getting harder and harder to win. But we know that the Engineer is low on cooldowns because they just use their Elixir S. So we're going to create that space, and we get a nice burst, but they do have the AED up. They use their Elixir S again, and I'm just kiting, and they're going to run away again. So now they're creating the distance for me, so I can keep chasing, and my sword 5 is not up, so I'm going to just wait a little bit until I get that up, even though they're probably not even targetable. I use my, so the priority of engagement skills here is obviously use the F1 to create distance, because even though it does really good damage, it's better to land the sword 5 than it is to land the F1, because the sword 5 does damage and CC, whereas the F1 only does damage. So it'll essentially allow me to land 2 skills to land the sword 5. So I use the F1, which I think is not going to land, just to create some, remove the distance between us. Now I land my sword 5, and we get the down. Now this is a really good situation, as I said, because Willbenders do tons of damage to enemies that are not, they're stationary. So I can put down my F3, which is a kind of like a symbol Willbender flame. Now I put down my sword 2, great sword 4. So I've got 3 essentially pulsing damages. There's no way that that Vindicator can do anything, and my heal is pulsing, so it's healing me a lot. So I can just freely cast, and we get the cleave on the Engineer. Now, the Vindicator is salvation, so I know that they're going to take a while to kill, and they know that they can't probably kill me as well, so they just back off. So we essentially end up getting a kill, and we get out alive. Here I'm being chased by 2 Harbingers, and Harbinger is extremely dangerous, not only by themselves, but now that I have 2 on me, because they do so much range damage, and it's just non-stop. So you need a lot of sustain to survive them, or the mobility to get out of range, but they have good mobility as well. And if you need to counter pressure them, then you need to burst them really hard, because they also have a lot of sustain. So being chased by 2 of them here is really dangerous. So I'm trying to get them in a better positioning, because if I'm chasing one of them and they're kiting me, then the other one's just going to free cast on me, and I'm just going to die because I'm trying to get through the health bar of one that is playing very defensively, while the other is trying to get through my health bar who is playing very offensively. So it's going to be, they're going to kill me faster than I'm going to kill them, right? So I need to get into a situation where I can get the kill really fast without having them kite. So I'm luring them behind this kind of like crate area, but I'm taking so much damage still because they're very mobile. They have swiftness still, and they actually, I think, corrupted my boons maybe. So I need to just go in now. So I just go in with the sword 2, and my F3 is going to be really nice, as well as the sword 5. So the F3 there gives me the Aegis and stability to prevent from getting CC'd, obviously, but also the F3 gives you resistance, and the resistance is going to prevent the weakness that they give from preventing me from using my, big ferocity crits. So using your F3 is often your best burst ability. And then now that we've got the resistance, we've got the sword 5 going on. They're immobilized, so I can just go in with my burst, F1 into the greatsword 2, and now I get them down. So what I want to do now is I want to cleave the down body. So I use my F2 ability, which will put down some flames on the ground, which will potentially heal me, and it will also give me more damage from the lethal tempo buff. And I'm going to use the greatsword 4 here, which I also want to constantly pulse while I'm using my elite here. I'm going to use my F3 again because I need more resistance to get, as you can see, I've got weakness on me, so I can't do any damage while I have that on me. So I can only trade while I have resistance because they've got just so much weakness. And I'm able to do a lot of damage with my greatsword burst, but you can see I'm taking so many condies. I've got 11 torment, and I have to get out. So I'm going to use my F2 just to get a little bit more healing to survive one more tick until I can use my heal skill. And I'm line of sighting behind this broken boat to give me just a little bit more time to get that heal off. Once I get it off, I can go in and burst. And now that we've got the down body finished off, I can back off, and I've got no cooldown. So obviously I can't take on the second Harbinger who's at full HP because I was focusing on the other one. So I have to reset and go for the full engage once I've got my cooldowns back. And they kind of get juked here by the wall, so we get a full reset, and now I can go on them. So what I want to play around here, you can see they use their dodge on my sword 4, because the only way that I win is if I burst them. So a decent Harbinger player is going to use their dodge pretty early. So not using your most important skills is really important to bait out those dodges. Like the sword 4, if it lands, sure, it does a lot of damage, but it's not the most important skill to land. So if I use that and they dodge it, now I can use my sword 5 into my greatsword 2 because they're lower on dodges. So yeah, kind of like baiting dodges is really important to killing these classes where you need to land a burst. So now I use my F3 for the resistance, and I miss on my sword 5, so they're not immobilized, so it's harder for me to land my burst. But since they use 2 dodges, they can't dodge anyways. So a lot of times you want to use an ability that pressures them from getting burst, and if they dodge that thing, then you just go ahead with the burst because they use their dodges. So we're going to land the greatsword 2 and 3 and then finish them off with all that burst damage. Here's a situation where I'm being pressured very hard by a thief, and it's hard to counter pressure because I'm getting CC'd. I have to use my F3 to be even able to attack back, but a lot of enemies are joining the fight, so I cannot attack back. So I use the guards here to Judge's Intervention to port away from the thief, but they have a lot of port potential. Now the thief has just used their shadow step to stay on top of me. So I know that the thief is using their cooldowns to play aggressively. And this is important because thieves have either the potential to play defensively or offensively with their cooldowns. And that also works for the initiative, which is their weapon skill resource. So if they use all of that to play aggressively, they can't use it defensively. So when I create space like this and I force them to use their cooldowns to chase me, then they lose the ability to disengage later. And as opposed to them having all the time in the world to finish me off by conserving their cooldowns, I bait them into thinking that they need to chase me down to kill me. And when they're out of their cooldowns and initiative, I can go back in for the kill. So I wait for them to engage on me here, and I use my smite condition to remove the weakness so I can counter pressure. They use their dagger storm, which prevents me from counter pressuring, so I wait until it finishes. They dodge, and I land my greatsword 5. Now this is really good because I can now CC them, and they just use Shadow Step and their Signet of Infiltration, which means I've got a really good opener on them. I pulled them. My F1 is great against blind because it will attempt to blind before it does its damage. So it'll remove my blind because it's not going to blind them, but it'll still hit. And now I can just attack them back. Now I want to go in for the finishing burst. You can see I have 3 stacks of lethal tempo on my buff bar. I want to keep that because that's a lot of damage. So I use my F2 just to maintain stacks of lethal tempo to get my burst. And I'm going to precast my Greatsword 2 into my Judge's Intervention. And they're really pressured. I land my Greatsword 3. And I'm going to finish them off with the Sword 5 because they have no disengage. So they're forced to play aggressively and trade with me while I've got the advantage because I have so much healing and sustain from trading. Here's a situation where I get jumped on by a Salvation Vindicator. The build that they're running is more of a tanky bruiser, and I'm running more of an assassin ganker. So I can't just go head to head with a build because essentially they counter me because they will be able to survive my burst and they'll out sustain me. But I can still potentially win a 1v1 if I use space while I have cooldowns and avoid their cooldowns and only trade damage with them when I will get favorable trades and use my mobility to be able to do that. So I'm creating space until I get my F3 up. Now that that's up, I have a decent amount of protection and Aegis and stability. My heal is up as well, so I especially want to go in then because I get healing out of doing damage. So it's a generally good trade. I don't have anything up right now, so I'm just waiting, and they are going to use their ability. So I use my elite to get my cooldowns back. Now I want to trade damage because I've got my cooldowns and I've got my F3 as well, which I can initiate on them. They do have their Shiro port ready, so maybe I want to go in early. So I've got my cooldowns. I pull them with my Greatsword 5 out of their dodge, which is huge because they lack the evade frame and they lack the boons that they would get from it. And we're doing a pretty good job of keeping up the pressure, but I don't have any sustain anymore, so I have to back off. Use my cleanse to get the chill off of me so I can get my cooldowns back. And I use my burst because my Greatsword swap was ready. But I've got nothing now. I have to use my heal, and they're pressuring me a lot. I can't use the Greatsword 5, so I need to just let it sit there and tick damage. And while my symbols are down, I can kind of trade because I'm getting value out of standing in them and they're taking damage. So that's another time, but yeah, essentially I'm out of cooldowns here and I want to play safe, so I'm just backing off. They can Shiro port on me, so I want to be at max range. I use my heal, so now I want to trade again, and I go in with my Sword 5, and this is gonna be able to, yeah, I'm gonna be able to finish them with the Greatsword 3 because they ran out of dodges and I finished them off when I had the burst ready. So that's how you want to play a more burst playstyle. You want to create space and then go in for the burst and then back off. It's more of an assassin than a bruiser. So you want to be opportunistic and you want to be aware of your cooldowns and play around them rather than just constantly doing damage over time. So if you like this content, then like the video and comment down below if you'd like to see a different class next time. And thank you to all of my patrons who make this content viable. If you would like to support me, you can check out the links in the description, share this content, and I will see you all next time.